So, we are in a biofuel lecture, and we discussed this concept of ethanol. And this was the last slide that we talked about. It was basically this United States map, and we said that out of the United States, we're looking at the center of the map in order for us to kind of realize what states are really heavy producers of ethanol that we can take advantage of for whatever kind of reason that might be. So, this was where we stopped. And the reason that we were talking about ethanol is because we are in a biofuel lecture. And again, maybe you haven't put the pieces together yet, but ethanol is going to be used as a fuel additive. Now, the question is why? When did this first happen? Why did we decide to do it? Because now what we are saying is that the farming America, the United States farmer that is growing corn or some other type of crop, can actually be in this for another reason other than just providing food. Now we have an issue that has to be addressed. If they are going to use their farmland and if they are going to grow this crop, do they really do it because they are growing food and selling it to suppliers? Or are they doing it because they are wanting to produce fuel or ethanol? Now, why did I write fuel? Well, on this slide, you're going to kind of see why. The United States, at a certain point after 2000, decided, well, gasoline prices, they're not very attractive at the moment. So, what can we do in order to wean ourselves off of gasoline? And one of the researchers at the time said, well, we could use something like ethanol. Ethanol can go into our gas tank. We probably are not going to encourage pure ethanol to go into the gas tank, but we can give you a mix of gasoline and ethanol. And all of a sudden, you started to see gas composition change. And it changed into something that we called E10. E, of course, stands for ethanol, and 10 represents 10%. You can also see E15s out there as well, but 10% is going to be the pretty common ethanol blend that you're going to see at any gas station right now, currently at the moment. The Center for Agriculture and Rural Development, we abbreviate that as CARD, Iowa State University, and University of Wisconsin, said 13 billion gallons of ethanol reduced prices by 89 cents per gallon. That means at the pump, if you did not have an ethanol blend, you would probably be expected to pay 89 cents more per gallon for that gasoline on any particular type of year. And this was specifically in 2010. Now, I will say, look at the bias that is going on here, okay? Agriculture and rural development. Of course, they're not going to publish any kind of study that goes against what they really stand for. Iowa State University and the University of Wisconsin. All right, well, if I go back, Iowa State right up here at the very top. And if we look at Wisconsin, Wisconsin's kind of in the top leader as well. Those two universities, they are not truly independent. They're going to be looking out for their farmland. They're going to be looking out for their culture. And of course, this is the study that was released. Listen, if it wasn't for ethanol, this gas would be way more expensive, and you don't want expensive gas, do you? So you need to let us blend ethanol into the gasoline and let this continue on from this point on. This was regarded as an additive, but I will say that this is not new. That's right. Once again, we have researchers in the market that wants you to believe that ethanol blended fuel is a new concept that was started back after 2000. But guess what, folks? It wasn't. This actually came way, way before, and we'll start taking a look at some of those. When did this actually start first happening? Ethanol in gasoline, ethanol to run a vehicle, is not a new concept. But for some reason, people believe nowadays that it is a fairly new concept, and it's not. So this is an additive, and the reason that they did it is basically so they could dilute the gasoline that was getting pumped into your vehicle. If they dilute the gasoline, then that means that this is going to be a lower amount that you actually need to purchase. And if this was a lower amount that you needed to purchase, well, this would save you money at the gas tank. And that was this whole concept. We could blend ethanol into the gasoline. We could make it weaker in a sense as far as gasoline goes. So therefore you don't need as much, you need 10% less. If you need 10% less, then you're not buying as much. And if you're not buying as much, and we multiply that by the millions of people that live in the United States, then we can kind of release some of our demand on this gasoline that we need for our daily lives. So if we can lower the demand, we will lower the cost, especially if we are reliant upon foreign oil, right? All of this really dictates back to other countries. This is a commodity that they are selling to us and to you as a consumer. So we are specifically tied globally to the oil industry, not just to the United States. Well, again, that's really going to play off of politics. It's who's in charge at the time. Do you want someone that's going to really be a driver in the United States oil supply where we produce our own and we can rely on our own oil resources? Or do you have someone in office that's going to look at globally what's going on and let's be reliant on other countries and buy the product from them? So if they want to raise and jack the prices up, then they can. And there's nothing that you can do about it as a consumer. And well, one of the ways is your voting box. Also, what was going on at the same time this argument was being made with ethanol blended fuel, and ethanol was often used as an octane rating booster, all right? So when I say octane rating, if you've taken our 145 course, you probably went through a laboratory where you identified a hydrocarbon based on its melting point or boiling point, based on its refractive index and so forth. Well, we had a conversation about octane rating at that time. And octane rating are these numbers that you are seeing at the gas pump. All right. So for instance, 87, 89, 93. Well, this is what we would call basically unleaded and then supreme on the other end. Some vehicles require the supreme, the high end. Some, they do not require that at all. Well, ethanol has this interesting attribute to it because ethanol has a very high octane rating. So that means that we can add ethanol into the gasoline and we can improve the octane rating in gasoline. And we can actually take gas that is unfit to be sold for your vehicle because that octane rating is too low. We can actually add ethanol to that, and that octane rating will increase. And when that does, maybe, just maybe, we can take the gasoline that was unfit to be sold prior, and now we can add ethanol to it, boost the octane rating up, and now we have an additional resource of maybe the low-grade gasoline that's out there that most cars require and most cars use. So this was like a one-size-fit-all problem solver. Ethanol was great. Ethanol was something that we had. Ethanol was something that could be blended into gasoline because it's soluble in those hydrocarbons that gasoline brings along with it. Ethanol would help out the farmer. Ethanol would help the economy kind of boost a little bit in those agriculture fields. Ethanol improved the octane rating, so it took unfit gas and it made it usable. I mean, this thing was almost perfect at the time. So we began to blend it. And we began to blend it, and you probably never knew that it was getting blended, and they just sneakily put it into the gasoline during that time. If you grew up between pre-ethanol blended and post-ethanol blended time frames, right? Again, we're putting an age on you now at this point. If we take a look at a chart, another chart, I know, but this one is the retail gasoline price when ethanol blending began to happen. So if you look at the year 2000, 2001, you actually see very little ethanol getting blended into the gasoline samples during this time. So this is where I'm going to kind of start. And if you look up here at the light blue line, this is basically the difference between what we would call premium and regular gasoline. It just helps us kind of compare. There's multiple different prices for those three different grades. So in a way, think of this as kind of an average. All right. So after 2001, we began to blend ethanol into the gas. And what you see is an uptick in the graph that begins to happen after 2001. So you're seeing more and more and more and more, and we're reaching to a point now where we're kind of flatlining a little bit, and that flat line is happening at 10%. That's really where most of the blending is taking place, 10% ethanol. Some states allow more. Some cars cannot use that particular blend, but don't be surprised if you do see E15s that are out there in some areas. And now you know what the E and the number stands for. The light blue line corresponds to the price. So as you can tell, it kind of worked. This idea that we could dilute gasoline down with ethanol, put it into your vehicle would be fine, would lower the cost of ethanol or the gasoline because our demand would go down. We wouldn't be using it as much anymore, right? Well, that wasn't the only factor. There's many factors that determine the price of gasoline. That was just one of them. But as you can tell, the trend line is going down, 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 and down. All right, so again, this concept was working. So what I want to talk about is this concept of ethanol, because I told you that this is not really a new concept, right? We think it is. People that don't really read up on history just honestly believe that we just came up with this one day, and all of a sudden we started putting ethanol in gas. And this was a wise new concept that some smart researcher came up with, but it wasn't. This is actually old news. This is old news in the science field, at least. This kind of thing was not surprising. This kind of thing was, yeah, we knew that this would work because we've done it before. Now you're questioning, well, when? When did we ethanol blend gas? I never really remember stories being told about that, right? This whole thing about, oh, I wish they wouldn't ethanol blend or gas because gas was so much better back in the day. There were different points in history that gasoline was blended with ethanol. People might not have known it. People might not have remembered it. But there was. This has been done before. Hundreds of years ago. But in order to get to that point, we need to talk about ethanol as a fuel before gasoline ever came into the picture. That's right. Ethanol is regarded as a fuel source. Just straight ethanol, folks. Straight out of the ABC store. Go and get you a bottle of Everclear. That Everclear is pure grain alcohol. That is a fuel source that we can use and that we did use for many different times in history for many different purposes. This usage of ethanol actually dates back 9,000 years ago. Whoa. 9,000 years ago? That's right, China showed us that ethanol was pretty common back in the day. Well, there's no natural source for ethanol. You kind of have to make it or process it or do something with it. So this basically allowed us to kind of understand the very early ages of ethanol use. People 9,000 years ago knew what alcohol was. We found remnants in drinking vessels that they would use back in the day. All of this targeted positive in an analytical instrumentation. Yes, it was ethanol residue. Yes, this was basically devices that they used to drink out of. Where did they get the ethanol? There's no magic lake of ethanol somewhere. If there is, somebody needs to tell me about it. But there isn't. This typically has to be processed in some form or some fashion. Well, 9,000 years ago, that's quite a bit along a time. 850 years? Persian. We can claim that they discovered ethanol during that time. Again, digging up these vessels, looking at these residues, looking at the vessels that they would put these things in. All of this dates back. We do that with carbon dating, analytical instrumentation. All of the residues of the things that were left behind, those are showing positive with analytical instrumentation. Again, ethanol was part of their culture as well. Italy, as you could guess it, Italy has a large history with ethanol, and we call it wine. In the 1100s, we have the whole alchemy era. They were out to really do and accomplish 4 different things. Well, during their studies, one of them may be trying to turn things into gold. They were discovering things like gunpowder. They were discovering typical organic solvents that we still use today. And they also helped discover ethanol. What could we do with it? How could we drink it? How did it make us feel once we did drink it? And furthermore, they also helped kind of fine-tooth this process of distillation. So distillation is taking something, of course, a complex mixture, heating it up, and separating it off into fractions. All of that was done by alchemy in the 1100s. Way, way, way back. These people knew it before we ever did. 1100s, we still find it in China. They were still fermenting. They were still distilling. And we actually found the old stills that they would use to ferment and distill the ethanol in. 1300s, we also find old distilleries in India. Again, this was a common thing that people were doing back in the day. They would ferment, they would distill, they would collect ethanol and use it for multiple purposes. And finally, one of the first uses of ethanol other than drinking was something that we called ethanol candles. It was this concept that we could take alcohol like this and put a wick in it, something that would soak up the ethanol, and then pull the wick up through a holder and light the wick on fire. And this created light. It also created some heat. I mean, if we played it smart, we could cook off of these types of things. Therefore, ethanol is an energy source. That's pretty important. But this discovery happened hundreds and hundreds of years ago, before we even started putting it into gas. So this was kind of the origin story of ethanol. Many different countries, many different civilizations, discovering ethanol, using it for multiple purposes, not just drinking. And then we get images like this. Pulque. That's the agave plant right there. This agave plant could be harvested. The picture is showing me that this agave plant can be put down into some type of container. This looks like a masher, right? I hope it is at least. Or plucking some leaves off of a plant. Something's going on in his hand. And he can take this tool, hopefully, and mush, 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 mush. Increase the surface area. This agave plant, it's just like corn. It's just like wheat. It's like any other crop. Inside of this agave plant, we have sugars. And those sugars, with proper bacteria or organisms, let me say that, with proper organisms, like yeast, can be put down into a pot, and this stuff can be fermented, and this stuff can be separated, and then all of a sudden, we have something that we call tequila. All tequila comes from the agave plant. That's why we call it tequila. That's its origin source. Again, hundreds of years ago, these people knew how to harvest, these people knew how to ferment, these people knew what to do with the final product. Here's another image. This image, group of Indians coming together, looking like they have a grand old time, half naked with each other. But what I want you to focus on is this image down here in the bottom left-hand corner. You see, all of these women are sitting around a pot, but look at what they're doing. It looks like they're putting their hands up to their mouth, and it looks like they're throwing up in it. What does this image tell me? Well, this image is a representation back in the day when everything was getting discovered, when we were learning new cultures with new people. These women would sit around a pot and they would take something called manioc root or yucca, and they would crush this stuff up into a big pot, and they would sit around all day, and they would take turns, and they would spit into that pot with the crushed up crop. Spit, 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 spit. And the reason that they would do this is because their spit, and it's pretty gross, kind of nasty, makes me sick when I even think about it as I talk about it. But as they spit into this vessel, well, number one, your spit has enzymes on the inside that will help break down the plant cell. It helps break down the polymer of starch that is also known as sugar. And it will begin to break it down one after another after another. It gives them individual units that the microorganism can feed off of. Where did the microorganism come off of? It came from their filthy mouths. Their filthy, disgusting mouths were laden with bacteria. And as they spit into that pot, their spit would break down the sugar chains into individual sugar units, and their spit would also have bacteria that would get incorporated into this nasty spit soup, and that bacteria would then begin to ferment. Folks, they would leave this out for days, they would come back to it, and then they would put it into a glass, and they would pass it around to all the people that wanted to enjoy the spit soup that they were making. Everybody enjoyed it. Everybody thought it was the greatest thing ever. And again, this was a very early encounter of ethanol. People fermenting, people heating, people getting a product. That product could be used for multiple purposes. And it just so happens that this was enjoyed and drank among the people. Just imagine the great, intense, deep flavors that alcohol would bring. When I see this picture, my mind actually immediately went to this movie, Midsummer. If you've never watched Midsummer, I would advise it. Go ahead and watch it. There's a scene in it where they all sit down at a table and they enjoy a dinner that has been prepared. And that dinner comes with what we call the May Queen Lemonade. So have you a May Queen Lemonade party this summer. Get you a couple of people together, have them over, basically tell them this is what you're serving up, and then show them the movie if they've not seen it. They might be surprised. And you might too, if you've not seen it yet.